Hello, everyone. My name is Sparrow, and today we're going to be talking about identity politics, the very cancer of entertainment, you could say. I have covered this in certain sections of the past videos, but this is the first video that really covers identity politics as a whole, which is nothing but horrible, really. It's really just a form of racial segregation that's being preached as some kind of social progress. It just tells everyone you're only as good as your identity. Who you are as a person doesn't matter, just your skin color or who you screw. And it's really evident in comic books right now, where people are being assigned projects solely based on arbitrary traits rather than their actual talent as a writer. The idea being is that you have to have some kind of shared appearance with them. Either they're black, they're gay, or a woman, rather than what actually matters as a writer. Someone who knows how to write characters and is qualified for the job. Before I get into any specifics, I want to introduce you to a little quote from Christopher Priest, formerly Jim Owsley, from a couple years back. It's really good. I really wish more people saw it. I really felt that for many years, when people picked up the phone to call me, the first thing they thought was black, and my suspicions were confirmed. I resented that. I can write anything. A lot of my co-creators of color and female writers can write anything. Just give them a chance. You have to become a master of your particular universe. I wrote a novel called 1999. It's my Astro City, a self-contained superhero universe. The main character is this police officer who's Irish. I knew nothing about Irish people, so I spent time doing research. I wrote a novel about a black female New York City arson investigator. I know nothing about being a firefighter. I know nothing of their apparatus or tactics, but you research, you get on the phone, you track people down, and you talk to actual firefighters. You find out about all this. Once you master this universe, then you sit down and start writing about it. I think I wrote a convincing Irishman, a convincing black woman, a convincing firefighter. I know the lingo and the equipment, and my writing has authority because of it. Don't tell me I can't write a Chinese lesbian superhero. That's bullshit. I can write anything. The problem is the two major companies don't have anybody of color in upper management with the exception of Jim Lee. There are certainly no African Americans in upper management. Anytime I'm writing about race now, I get all these notes back where they're wringing their hands and not sure about anything. They're terrified of the Twitterverse, but half those people aren't even reading your comics either. They're reading it online, or heard it somewhere, or pirated it, but they're not buying your comics. They're getting it on Twitter, and you're terrified of them, and guiding your publishing program based on it. Just do good stories, well told, and you'll see the return on it. Well said, man. The idea that you can only write about your race or your gender or your sexuality, whatever, it does nothing but restrict people. It tells you you're just only your traits. That's literally it. They don't believe in content of character at all. It's being judged by the color of your skin. It's the ass backwards opposite of what MLK said. And now I'm going to provide my own perspective on this. What really got me thinking about it was recently they announced this new comic miniseries for Overwatch about Tracer. I played a shit ton of Overwatch from 2016 to like 2018, and I was desperate for lore during that entire time. I thought the comic was too late, but what really caught my attention right when they announced it was who they hired for the creative team. Mariko Tamaki and Babs Tarr, chosen only because they're queer or gay, rather than because they could actually write or draw. They have no history of having a following, of telling good stories, of doing anything positive. And these were the people they chose to write the Tracer comic because Tracer was lesbian, so they decided the creative team had to be lesbian as well. And that just rubbed me really wrong, because instantly I knew why they did it. They wanted to impress the Twitterverse. They wanted to make sure that journalists write nice things about the comic, because they knew if they hired men for the comic book based on merit, they would get the Twitterverse crying. The Mary Sue and CBR and Newsarama, all those sites would write hit pieces on it, and they would complain. But guess what? That wouldn't matter, because the comic itself would be better and it would sell better for sure than hiring two women who don't know how to create good comic books. Get my man Priest from earlier to write it. Get Aaron Alfeche of the Jawbreakers to draw it out. Make it about action. Don't define it exclusively based on the character's sexuality. Watch the sales be good and for the comic to actually be well received by the readers. It's just a shame because this is the first time we got a major comic in Overwatch's entire existence, and they chose to focus on the most trivial of things so that the certain individuals on Twitter don't get offended by it. And this is part of a larger problem with entertainment. I can't think of a more inherently fascist idea for hiring than identity politics. But really, I'm just getting started, because once I get to the next example, it'll put a lot of things in perspective. The next example I'm going to focus on is the Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel, and then later as Captain Marvel. And it'll show what really matters is hiring the best people for the job. Brian Reed's run on Miss Marvel from 2006 to 2010 lasted 50 straight issues. Never once did it get canceled. And throughout its entire run, the sales were great. It outsold Wonder Woman. It was actually their best-selling female-led title in the Marvel lineup. And Reed wrote Carol as actually being a human being. Like, she was insanely powerful, but she was not completely invincible. She had flaws. She had compassion for others. She had genuine friendship. And she was pretty easy on the eyes. Wearing the costume and having the appearance she was intended to have, before political correctness, of course, which leads us into the next part, Captain Marvel, the unmitigated failure of the character going on since 2012, and they insist to keep it going no matter how much it hurts them. I really don't know how much more clear it can be that nobody likes this character. I mean, she's supposed to be like this A-list character, the greatest paragon in the Marvel Universe, the one that the shill sites can't stop trying to prop up, the one who is supposed to be superior to her old, outdated, quotes, counterpart, the one that's supposed to be modern sensibility and all that shit. They can't get her to sell for anything. They can't even give her comics away. And they always hire women to write her, women with no talent, all the way from the beginning with Kelly Sue DeConnick. And everyone who has stepped up since has always been these YA novelists who don't know anything about comic books and don't know how to write characters for that matter. And it's all because they want to use her as this platform to preach feminism onto an audience that doesn't want it. The Brian Reed run on Miss Marvel sold more on average than both Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel and Kamala Khan as Miss Marvel put together, and it's not even close. And I need to mention it, they didn't have to relaunch her during this time. Her run lasted 50 solid issues and sold well with each one. Again, it needs to be said, Miss Marvel was their highest selling female lead title and regularly outsold Wonder Woman, a far more famous character in pop culture. That should say everything right there. Meanwhile, Captain Marvel has been on her 10th, 11th relaunch? I've lost count. And the only reason Kamala Khan lasts as long as she does is because she's Sana Amanat's self-insert character, so they don't cancel her for her extremely low numbers that other people get canceled for. Actually, other characters get canceled for low sales that are still far higher than what Kamala Khan pulls on average. And it all goes down to identity politics. It really matters more to have a writer who can do the job rather than has the right traits. Because there's a good reason why Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, sold so well on average. Meanwhile, Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel, starring Kamala Khan, don't sell well, and they preach identity politics all over the place. And it's still important to keep in mind that back then, Carol was considered a B-lister, and she still did far better than her mainstream A-list, supposedly, counterpart, and her supposed breakout legacy spin-off that they try to act like everyone likes, but nobody actually does. Moving on, there's this idea that black people could only be written by black people, and that's just not true at all. I mean, just look at what Christopher Priest said earlier. Priest is black, and anyone can write anything. And in fact, many of the most iconic black superheroes were not created by black people. They had some of their best runs by white creators. It just doesn't matter what color your skin is when it comes to writing. What matters is how well you can write said character. Just look at how Chris Claremont created some of the most iconic and well-written female characters in all of Marvel. In fact, for the longest time, the most celebrated heroines in the Marvel universe were from the X-Men, and they were created and written by Claremont at their best in many cases. And furthermore, all this does is hurt minorities more than anything, because they're only allowed to write for people of their kind, not anyone else. Consider how Greg Pak, when he started out, did everything. He did the Avengers, he did the Hulk, he did the X-Men, and now he's still active in the industry, he still works for Marvel, and all he writes are Asian characters and nothing else. I don't think it's ideal for anyone at all, to have to write totally awesome Hulk. I mean, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemies. As with the equally ridiculous Agents of Atlas, a superhero team that's entirely Asian people, as if that worked. It's not like Asians have a history of fighting with each other like any other race. Nope, they all just get along because we're Asian. It's absolutely pathetic and actually kind of racist when you think about it, to think that anyone of any race would instantly get along, as opposed to thinking like individuals. Hell, if we went with the idea that anyone of any race would just get along with each other, then the history of Europe would not be marked with constant bloodshed between colonial empires and superpowers. And it also leads to people who have absolutely no business working in comics getting into comics, because they have those traits and they desperately needed someone who matches them. Like with the America series written by Gabby Rivera. Like, America Chavez is a lesbian Latina from the Bronx. Well, not actually, but she's written that way. So they actually went out of their way to find a lesbian Latina from the Bronx, and that's a very short list. And we ended up with Gabby Rivera, who is like the worst writer Marvel has had. She's definitely somewhere up there. And hell, this is like the only reason people like Vita Ayala or Mags Visaggio ever had careers to begin with, because they wouldn't survive a day in a merit-based industry. And it was never needed to begin with, considering that there have always been non-whites and women in these companies for decades now. And they got in by merit, just like anyone else, and they did good, just like anyone else. I can show you some of them right now, like the aforementioned Priest, known as Jim Owsley at the time, was a major name since the 80s. He's black. Ann Nesenti, one of the best Daredevil writers and the one responsible for turning the X-Men from a single book into a franchise, woman. As with Louise Simonson, also an editor on the New Mutants, also a writer of X-Factor and the Power Pack, woman, and married to Walt Simonson to boot. Fabian Nicieza, one of the top writers in the 90s and the aughts, an immigrant from Argentina. Hell, even Milestone, which is known as the company full of black creators, all of them were hired on merit, and the work reflected that. Dwayne McDuffie, rest in peace, is a legend. He really helped the comic book industry with his natural skills and talent. And that's just scratching the surface with this, off the top of my head. But the idea that you need to hire solely based off of skin color or gender or sexuality is absurd. If you hire on merit, you will end up with a diverse team. And for that matter, what's with this idea of treating everyone of a single race the same, even with white people? I mean, there's a pretty big difference between someone who's from a small town in Ohio versus someone from Moscow. Just saying. And the obsession with race has only set us back decades. It's actually crazy how much we've regressed from these so-called progressives, fighting a battle that never needed to be fought, and dividing all of us in the process. And of course, they don't even have good intentions. They are the real racist, sexist, homophobes here, but that's another story. I think I've covered as much as I want to cover on this topic for now, but something tells me I will be revisiting this later. Until next time, this is Sparrow, signing off.